All right, hello everyone. So for class today, I want to just go over a few discussion points and then we'll get into the lesson. So first up, I have some news for the final exam. We are going to go ahead and do a final exam. It'll be on D2L, and I'll be giving you guys more details once we have a firm date for the exam. But I just wanted to pass that along to you. And the basic reason why we're going to continue with the final exam is that we missed the second test. So we've only had the one test so far, and I think it's important to consolidate the learning by having a final exam in this course. And we've been through with the first test, we've been through the process of basically doing some practice problems and prepping, and that same process is what I'm going to use for this final exam. I'll be posting topics for you to study, and I'll be going over some review questions with you to help prepare for the final exam. Okay, next point of business is the project. So the last video I put a lot of information about the project. I also basically proposed an algorithm that you may not want to, but you may want to use for your project. What I'd like to do today is just go over that algorithm, kind of review and do a few sample cases using that algorithm, just to make sure that everyone is as clear as possible in case you wanted to use that algorithm for your calculator project. And then the next thing is Chapter 7. So I've put up information online about Chapter 7 on D2L. And Chapter 7 is a pretty, I'm excited to get into this chapter. So far when we've been doing document object model manipulation, we've been doing things like changing the text in a node or displaying an error message. So not maybe the most exciting things. Chapter 7 though, we go into manipulating images and handling events. And also setting up timers, both a one-time timer and a repeating timer. So using this, we can do more powerful effects and transitions on our websites. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so what I want to do is go over the calculator algorithm, as I said. So I'm just going to put a couple sample formulas on the board here that we can then run through and use to sort of describe the algorithm. So let's say 5 times 6 plus 21. And we can also go, let's say 200 minus 33 divided by 3. All right. So these would be basically, key presses, and I've got the calculator here, so we can kind of track, okay, what button at each step of the formula would the person be pressing. Now, the way that my algorithm works is, the key thing anyway, is that I have 2 arrays. One array is called the original formula elements, and this stores exactly the formula, how the user enters it. And the original formula elements array is only used to basically display the formula to the user. I'm not actually going to do any calculation with it. And the reason is because the original formula elements array, it will contain addition, subtraction, and multiplication, division. And because of that, that complicates going through and doing the actual arithmetic on it. So let's now represent original formula elements. So I'll just mark it down, original, okay? Let's just call it original because I'm going to run out of space here. And I'm going to use a rectangular notation here for arrays, okay? And each of these rectangles represents an index in the array. All right, and the top of the array, that's going to represent array index 0, or the start of the array. And as we add elements, we're moving down into the array. So let's look at the first one here, 5 times 6 plus 21. So someone goes to the calculator, all right, and here I can almost, okay, not quite. Anyway, they're basically punching in the buttons on their calculator, all right? So the first one they hit is going to be 5, okay? So they hit 5, that's going to then be placed in a variable which we have called current value. Okay? It doesn't actually get added to the array right away. Now, in the case of original elements, you might be wondering, well, why can't we just put 5 in as soon as they hit 5? Well, the reason is we don't know what else they're going to hit. They might hit 5, 6, 3, okay? And we're building up a larger string here. So they hit 5, then they hit the plus symbol, all right? So at this point, we know that we're done building up a number. So in the original formula elements, we're going to hit 5, okay? Add 5 there. And we know that the operation that they're going to use is going to be the plus symbol. So we can place the plus symbol into our array. And then they begin, we're expecting them now to enter in some more numbers. Now, if they were in this situation to enter in another operator, we could basically flag this as an error. So we could have a simple check in our code that basically says, are we expecting an operator or are we expecting a number? And if we are in fact expecting an operator, we could basically print out a message to the screen saying that you've made a mistake. So now they go and they enter 6. So we have a variable that stores that, and we're waiting to see what are they going to add after that. Then they go ahead. Oh, I made a mistake here. That's a multiplication symbol. So, all right, so this symbol here is multiplication, okay? So they enter a 6, and the next thing they do is they hit plus. So at this point, we can put the 6 into our array, and we can also put the plus operator into our array. Then they go ahead and they hit 2. They hit 1. We're building up our string once again. Then they hit the equal sign. As soon as they hit the equal sign, we put in 21 because we know that that is the last number that they're going to add to the formula. And right now, we've represented our original elements here, the formula exactly how the user entered it, okay? So this should be pretty simple. And when we talk about the algorithm, there is some complexity to it, but this part is pretty simple. So what I recommend if you're going to use my strategy is get everything set up, get all your code set up, and to do that, look at my previous video. Then get the original formula elements array working properly, where it's storing all the correct values. And then when the person hits the equal sign, instead of solving the equation, simply show the concatenated string that shows the complete formula. All right, let's look now at the other array, and I call that formula elements. So this is my other one. All right, and this is going to be an array just like the previous one. Okay, and they somewhat mirror each other in that they represent the same data, the same formula of what someone punches in. The only difference is, for the formula elements, we are going to solve division and multiplication as we go. So let's see how we would do that. The first press here, so we're going to go through the same formula again. The first press they make is 5. So we store that in a variable, and we're waiting to see, are they going to press more numbers? They end up pressing multiplication. So we know 5 is the first number, and we then add in our multiplication symbol here. Now, when we do this, when we add the 5, we need to see, was there a previous multiplication or division operator before this one? Okay? If there is, that means we have to solve. We can't just enter in 5. We would have to solve the multiplication or division. In this case, though, there isn't, because this is the beginning of the array. So there's nothing 2 elements above the multiplication symbol here that we just entered. So we enter in that, and then we allow the user to continue pressing keys. They press 6. We store that in a variable. Then they press the plus operator. So we put in 6 here, and we put in the plus operator. Now, when we put in the plus operator, we check, and we see, was the operation that was done before this one, okay, 2 elements above, was it multiplication or division? In this case, it was. So this is where we have to do, this is the one challenging trick that we have to add into our code if we want to use this algorithm. So instead of entering in basically the 6 and the plus as we did in our original array, now we need to modify our formula elements. So what we're going to do is we see that we had a multiplication symbol here, and now we have 2 numbers that go with it. So we're going to solve 5 times 6, okay? And we're going to replace the values in that array with 5 times 6. So we know that 5 times 6 is going to be 30, and I'm going to take the 5 times 6, and I'm going to place 30 here. And the last symbol that was pressed was a plus sign. So I now enter that in. All right? So that's the one complex bit of this algorithm. Now we let the user continue to enter data. In this case, they hit a 2, then they hit a 1, then they hit the equal sign. So we know that the last element was 21. We add that in. And essentially, these two formulas, they equate to the same value. The difference is we've solved the 5 times 6. We've removed the multiplication as we've gone through and done it. Okay? So probably one of the best ways if you're trying to get a grasp on this algorithm is to do this exact exercise that I've done. You can just get a piece of paper. You can draw out your two variables. You can come up with some formulas, okay? And you can step through trying to simulate the user's action in terms of what buttons they've hit on their calculator. Okay, so I'll leave this one to you guys. I want you guys now, okay, you can go and erase these values in my array and go through and see if you can do 200 minus 33 divided by 3, if you can basically step through the calculation of entering input and enter these into the two arrays, okay? So what I'd like, so go ahead and try that out. I think that'll be a pretty good exercise for you, and we can come back at the end of this lesson, and I'll take up how I would go about doing that. All right, so let's get into chapter 7. So I posted some examples here on D2L from the book, so I'll download those. And let's download the slides here. Okay, let's extract these. All right, so we've got a slideshow and we've got an image swap. So the two things that we're going to learn in chapter 7, one is basically how to manipulate images. And part of that is using the document object model traversal and modification, the different properties that we've been using to, for example, get a bunch of link elements or image elements that are children of a certain element. We can also now set attributes. So if we want to change the actual image URL, we can change that attribute as needed to like swap images and stuff. So obviously that's a big part. And then the other one is going to be using a timer. So a slideshow, that's a perfect example where you would use a timer object that's going to basically either one time it'll call a function, or you can have it repeatedly based off of an interval call a function. All right, let's look at the slides. Okay, so we're working with images. Links, images, timers. Oh, that's not what I want. All right. Make this slide bigger. Okay, we can probably just go with this. That's fine. So, all right. So as I said, we're going to look at handling images and links and such. And one of the things that when we do this, we have to be aware of is there's an event generated in a lot of situations. And we've seen this where, for example, we click on a submit button on a form. Basically, there's an event that's generated that automatically submits the form. Another example is if we have a link and we click that link, okay, we don't actually have to hook up a click listener. An event is automatically generated and the link, the URL is opened. And that's the default behavior that we've been looking at so far. However, in some of the examples we'll do in this chapter, we might not want the default event to execute. In other words, if we have a link on our page, we might not want that to take us to another page, to open that image in another page. we might want it instead to basically run a function that does something useful for us. And to do that, we have to do a process called canceling basically an event. And it's really, really simple to do, okay? So these are some examples here that's showing on this slide that we have a element, so a link element. We have inputs and buttons, which are part of forms. So you can have these, if they have a certain type attribute, they will automatically submit the form. All right. Now, if you want to cancel so if you want to basically, say for example, you have a submit button, and when the person presses it, you want the form to submit, but if there's an error, you don't. So the way we've done it previously is we don't use a submit button. We use a regular button, and we handle the submission ourselves. The other way, though, is that we can use a submit button. We can check for errors, and if there is one, we can then cancel the default event. And if there isn't one, we don't do anything, and we let the form be submitted. So here's an example. This is the first block of code up here. That basically we have a event handler function, okay, and this is a function expression, and we're adding a parameter. So we could type this. This is how we've typically typed these before, and that'll work. But you also have the option of adding a parameter, and what that parameter here allows us to do is we can then go and this should be EVT, I believe. We have the ability to cancel the default action. So if that handler was hooked up to a submit button, when that submit button is pressed, now we can prevent the form from being submitted if we find some sort of mistake. Now the book also goes through and talks about older browsers. These are ones that are not compliant with the document object model, and you don't actually get a parameter. And what they're showing here is that basically, if that's the case, you can grab the window event from the window object, and you can set the return value equal to false. Now, we're not going to focus on this. This code is here. It's for reference, and it's good to be aware that these differences exist in older browsers because you may be working on some legacy code, and you'll come across this. But when we write our code, we're not going to be concerned with that. Okay. All right, so here's another example here. We have a function expression called event handler. When this is called, basically it checks to see if there's an event. So basically it gets the event, and it's going to go in and it's going to call prevent default. Okay, now this, once again, they're using they're double checking here for older browsers. In our case, we wouldn't even need to do that. We could just go and, we could just go and cancel the default action, okay? And that really simplifies things. I'm not trying to say that supporting older browsers isn't important, but we're learning this for the first time, so that looks a lot simpler, right? It's a lot easier to explain, yeah, we're canceling an event, whereas before we were focusing more on older browsers, all right? And that's not what I want to focus on here. So when the book talks about that, you can kind of just gloss over it, look for the actual action that we're doing to cancel the event. Okay, now because a lot of the examples in this book use images, for example, doing a slideshow or doing an image rollover, and the reason we're doing that is because these are powerful effects that we can add to our websites using JavaScript. So it's kind of exciting. We get to do some of these things. One of the techniques, though, the book talks about is preloading images. And the whole idea there is if you have like a large image, when the document object model is loaded, if that image isn't built into the DOM, all right? So if there isn't an actual image that references that URL, then the image isn't actually loaded into memory. So when you click on a link and then you're going to then transition to show this image on your site, well, you guys can probably guess what could possibly happen. You might get a little bit of stutter or a bit of delay, or you know, the responsiveness on your site won't be particularly good, and that's because your computer now has to go and fetch this image from disk and load it into memory and then display it. So the technique to get around this problem is to preload any images that you're going to use. And it's a very easy thing to do. All you have to do is create an image object and set the source to all of the images that you might want to load. That way, when you first load your document, all of those images will be preloaded into memory, and then when you go to use them, they're already there and it's pretty much instant. You won't see any stutter. So this is a technique that's used actually in video games a lot, because in video games, a little bit of stutter is pretty much disastrous for games. So when you load a level for a game, you pretty much preload all of your assets, and the big one is the images. And that way, when you need to display them, it can be instantaneous. Whereas if you ever have to fetch one from disk, you're going to see that frame rate stutter, even for a couple frames while it does that. Okay, so this is the technique you would use to actually preload an image. You would go var image is new image, and then you would set the image source to the URL for that image. Now notice here, the image, it's not actually displayed. Okay, that's the key thing here. This image doesn't have to be one that's included in your HTML. It only has to be in your JavaScript. And as soon as you set the source to the actual URL, now you've cached the image. All right. Now, this is another example here. And what this one does is it grabs all of the elements in the document that are links. So of course, links in this case, you can guess, would be pointing to, is probably going to call a function expression that modifies the image in your document. So what it does then is it goes through each of the links, it loops through them, and for every link that it gets, it creates an image and it sets the image source to the URL for that link. So essentially, it's now cached all of those images. And then when you click on those links after your document loads, it'll be instantaneous because those are preloaded images. Okay, so we got our first example here. This is our image swap application. So let me fire this up here. So I'm going to open up this in brackets. And I'll open up the JavaScript as well. Where's my JavaScript? Open with brackets. Okay, there we go. And I'm also going to open up my CSS. Why not? Now, the CSS, usually we haven't been focusing on it because it's mostly for styling. But let's see here. Is there anything in? Well, the list. Okay, so we have a list here, and the display is inline. So the item there that's important is that's what allows the list items to all be displayed horizontally rather than vertically. Okay, let's look at the HTML. So our HTML here, we are linking in our external style sheet and our JavaScript up at the top, and then in our body, we have our unordered list, and we have all of our list elements that are displayed horizontally based off of our CSS. And at the bottom, this is the key part that we're going to modify. We have a header that has an ID of caption, and we have an image with an ID of main image. So I'll go ahead and run these. So the header is catch and release, and the image at the bottom is this one of these guys catching a fish. And essentially now, if I go and click on any of these images, they are going to modify the caption and the image in the rest of the document here. And the other operation that was done with this website is all of the images were pre-cached. So as soon as I click on this, it automatically goes and updates that. All right. So let's look at the JavaScript now. All right. So we have our $sign function. We're using strict, which is very good. $sign function to basically save us typing, get element by ID. And then we come into our window on load function, and we are getting the list node. So this is going to be the parent of all of the list elements. which we have four list elements containing links. And we can just verify that by going back to the HTML. So yeah, we have an unordered list, and then we have 4 list elements which all contain links. Let's go back to the JavaScript. So let's focus on the list node here. So this is going to be the basically the ID of the parent. And we come in here and we go list node get elements by tag name. So this is going to get all of the links that are children of the list node, right? And that stores it in an array called image links. Then we loop through all of the image links. There's going to be 4 of them. And for each of them, well, we preload the image. Now keep in mind the preloading, this is optional. It's a recommended thing to do though. But if you comment that out, it's still going to work. I don't even know, on a fairly fast computer, if you would really notice anything most of the time. But it is a good practice to use. So we preload the image, and then for each of the image links, that's the 4 links, we create an on-click event handler. And this on-click event handler is going to be, in this case, they're using what's called an anonymous function. So we've often been using function expressions or named functions so far. This is another way that a lot of JavaScript programmers, they like to use anonymous functions. So right here, basically they create the function. We're using the event parameter. That way, if they click a link, we don't have them go to the reload that image in a separate in the current tab. We stay on the current page that we're on. So we come in here. Let's look at the event. So we have the event, and with the event, we go in and we cancel the event. Now they're doing this old, let's get rid of this. We don't need to worry about this because we're going to use a modern browser. So I can just go event.prevent default. Okay. And that's going to prevent the link from actually triggering its event. All right. So for this event handler, we're looping through all of the links. And we have a variable here called link. And one of the really key important things is we're setting link equal to this. And this is probably one of the trickier parts of the code here. You have to understand how this works. If we didn't do this, then essentially we would only be creating one event handler, and all of the 4 links would have the same event handler. What allows each of the 4 links to have different behavior is that we attach this to this link variable inside the function. And what that does is basically each link that was clicked, that's going to be stored in this variable. And that allows each link to be basically handled separately from the other ones, right? So if I look at my HTML, all right, this link here has a URL of release.jpg, whereas the other links all have different URLs. So when I click on each of the links, I want to be able to make sure I differentiate between the different ones. And that's why I'm grabbing this parameter, and I'm using that to basically grab the properties I want. If I didn't do that, then I wouldn't be able to tell the different links apart. So that's something, if you're not quite clear on that, definitely go through the book. You can go online and look at JavaScript event handling and this parameter. It's a very important concept, you understand that. So we get this parameter, we assign it to a variable link, and then we have we haven't talked about the image node and caption node, but those are the main image and the main caption. And we're going to manipulate those based off of the link. So for the image node, we're setting the source to the URL from the link here. Then for the caption node, we are getting the first child node value because we have to traverse down to the text attribute that is a child of the header 2, which is our caption node, and we're setting that to the attribute title. And if I go back and look at my HTML, I can see that I have an attribute title here for each of the links. So that's storing what I want to display when someone clicks that link. So I do that, I prevent the default action from happening, and the last thing I do is I focus on the first, this is in the window on load, I focus on the first link in my array, so the first unordered or list element. That way, if someone is unable to use the mouse, they can use the keyboard to traverse back and forth using tab and then hitting enter to select a link. So let's just, well, we already ran this, so you've seen that it works. Let me just demonstrate though, if I were to go and prevent the default action from taking place, you guys can probably guess what would happen. Okay, if I click on these, instead of it actually working, it's going to then load that image in a separate, in the same page. And that's obviously not what we want, and that's the importance there of preventing the default action. All right. Okay, so I think we can move on. All right, so the slides here, this is just going over what I just showed you. It's talking about the HTML, the JavaScript, and explaining the steps that we just took. All right. Okay. All right, so now we can move on. We've talked about basically the default, canceling the default event of elements. And we've talked about manipulating images now. We've done an example of that where we can take a link on a page and use, when that link is clicked, we can then grab information, attributes, and we can use that to manipulate our document object model. So the other topic in this chapter is timers. So basically with timers, there's two types of timers. You can have a one-time timer, or you can have a repeating timer. So this first example here on my slides, this is showing us a one-time timer. And to do that, we call a function called setTimeout. And setTimeout takes two parameters. It takes a function, and as you can guess, that's the function that will be called, and it then takes a delay time. The delay time is going to be in milliseconds, and after that interval is expired, the function will be called. So this is the simplest way to use a timer, is to use a one-time timer. Now let's say, for example, you called setTimeout, and after an interval of, say, 10,000 milliseconds or 10 seconds, you're going to call a function, and all of a sudden, though, you realize that you don't want to call that function. Maybe the function is going to traverse away from the web page. You could have a cancel button, and if that cancel button, called the clear timeout method, you would then cancel that event. Now, in this case, to do that, you would have to go var timer, equals setTimeout. Let's get rid of that comment. And then the clear timeout would have to refer to this, in this case, a global variable, which stores a reference to the timer. And when the timer is cleared, the actual callback will cease to happen. Okay. So it looks like we have an example here. Let's take a look at the example. So I've got... Okay, this is a slideshow. Okay, this is a more complex example. So this example, let's just focus on, we'll stay on the slides then. So with this example here, we have, this is our HTML. Right, so we have a field set. So basically the field set, I believe it's an HTML element that basically groups data together. And this one has a legend, a new version is available. We can see that displayed. We also see a paragraph, a text element, upgrade will start. Then we have a input button. And inside the button, we have text that says cancel upgrade, okay? So basically, what's gonna happen with this example, as soon as we load this page, we're gonna start a timer that's gonna go for 5 seconds. When the timer is done, I'm not sure what it's going to do yet, but it's going to do something. And we have a button here which allows us to cancel the timer if we don't want this default behavior to occur. Okay. So let's look at our JavaScript here. So we declare a timer variable. This is going to be a global variable. And in our window on load, we set the timer equal to set timeout. Our function expression is set upgrade, and we're waiting for 5 seconds. Then we're registering our cancel button. So if the person wants to cancel, we are getting the cancel button, and we're setting the on-click event equal to cancel upgrade. So cancel upgrade will be called if they click on that button. So let's look at what our start upgrade function expression will do. In this case, it's going to get the cancel button and it's going to hide it. It's going to set the attribute to hidden for that cancel button. And it's going to grab the message, which is one of the IDs here. So we have a span element message, and right now it just has it's blank. But what the message is going to, we're going to change that to actually say we're starting a download. That's the action we're going to perform, so we're not really doing a whole lot here. And then if we actually were doing a download, this is where the code would go. Okay, so, all right, so we've looked at the one-time timer, which we use set timeout to start the timer. And as we know, it's only called once. Let's now look at an interval timer that's going to be called repeatedly until you cancel the timer. All right, so pretty much the same thing here. We have set interval, we pass it a function and an interval time. So instead of set timeout, it's set interval, and now the timer is going to constantly repeat. They're missing var timer. And that way, if it's a global variable timer, you have a reference to it and you can cancel the timer when you need to. All right. So this example, we've just got a basic HTML page, and you'll notice at the bottom right, it says number of seconds on page. So this would be a perfect example where you want to update the user, based on a certain interval. And then maybe once they get to say 10 or 15 seconds, you're going to take some additional action. So for this to work, you basically have a text element, a span, which has an ID of counter. And as you can probably guess, we're going to have we're going to create an interval timer. And the function expression that's called is going to increment the text inside this span by 1 every time we call it probably. So let's look and see what's going on. We have our timer variable, which is global, so that way we can reference it from anywhere. So if we start a timer in one function expression, we're able to then cancel it in another one. We have a counter variable, which is important so that everyone knows what second count we're on. And then in our window on load, right here, we go timer equals set interval. We pass it the update counter, and we go with 1 second. So every second update counter is going to be called, and what does it do? It increments counter, and then it grabs the span, which has the text inside it, by ID called counter. It gets the first child to traverse to the text element, and then it sets the text value or node value equal to counter. Okay, so really simple example. And if we did want to, in this case, they aren't giving you the option of clearing it. But if you did want to clear it, you would then say clear interval and pass in the global variable. Okay. All right, so for the example I want to do, I'm going to go through and just do a little coding exercise. So let's say we want to create a website where we show the biggest hits from a musical artist, for example. And there's sort of 2 situations. If the artist is a one-hit wonder, then we are going to want to use set timeout because we only need to set their hit song 1 time. If they are an artist that's had lots of hits though, we're going to want to use set interval to constantly update the hit song that we're displaying. So let's do the situation first where it's a one-hit wonder. So I'm going to take this JavaScript here, and I'll just kind of remove what we've previously had. And I'm also going to modify the HTML. So instead of fishing images, it's favorite songs by favorite artist. Okay, and I'll get rid of the unordered list, and I can also get rid of these here. And for my paragraph, I'm going to give it an ID, and I'll set that equal to fave song. Okay, and just to allow there to be a text element here, I'm going to just enter in a space character. That way I can quickly just grab the text element and modify it. I don't have to also add one on. All right, so I've got that set up, and let's look at the JavaScript now. So for this JavaScript, I'm going to create a timer. So var timer, and I'm also going to need a function expression to set the text of my favorite artist. So var set favorite song equals function, and I'm going to get my element by ID, so $fave song dot, and I want to go in this case I want to go first child dot node value, and I'm going to set that equal to whatever the favorite song is. So I guess I need another variable. So var favorite song, and I'm going to set that equal to favorite song. And in my window on load, I'm now going to say timer equals set interval, and the function I want to call is set favorite song, and I'll go 2,000 milliseconds, so two seconds before I call it. Now, to make this as realistic as possible, I have to make sure that we're using a true one-hit wonder artist. So I've done some digging, and there is a band called Chumbawamba, and they had a one-hit wonder hit song. Okay, I'm not gonna be able to say this word, but this is their one big hit song, and I'm gonna place that as my favorite song. All right. So let's try running this. Oh no, live preview error. Oh, okay. I'll just save this and I will reload my brackets. Okay, let's try this now. There we go. Okay, so it's got my favorite song by favorite artist, and after 2 seconds, nothing happens. So let's take a look. And we have an error here. So let's go take a look at, looks like I didn't use quotes, I'm guessing. That's correct. You guys are probably all yelling at me. All right, there we go. And now we can try this again. Okay, so if I reload this page, it says favorite song by favorite artist, and then boom, right? After 2 seconds, that timer hits, and that's the end of it. The timer's not gonna keep going because it's a one-time timer. Now, let's say we are picking an artist who is not a one-hit wonder artist. So now we're going to use an array for our favorite songs. Now, I'm not going to mention the name of the artist. I'm going to leave that as an exercise for you to guess what artists these songs come from. So I'm just entering in my songs. And just a couple more. All right, so we've got that array now set up with favorite songs for an artist. And we're gonna modify this now. we need to, because we're now going to be looping through, I'm going to declare a variable which is going to be called song index. I'll set that equal to 0. And when my set favorite song is called, I need to now increment, so song index plus equals 1. And I've got to be careful I don't go off the end of the array. So I'm now going to say song index. I'm going to use modulo arithmetic, and that's going to be favorite song mod favorite song dot length. All right. And now I can set this equal to favorite song. It's no longer just a simple variable, it's an array, and I will index into it using song index. Okay, so in my window on load, I set interval to call set favorite song. So let's see what it would look like if I run this. Okay, so as you can see, every 2 seconds it's looping. Now it turns out I had a slight mistake. For the previous example, I was assuming I was using set timeout, because with Chumbawamba they only have one song, so I don't need to keep updating it. But I used the wrong method. So if I were to use set timeout now with this artist, and I reload this, you'll notice that it'll only be updated once. So blank space is the first favorite song, and after that the timer stops running. So this is not what I want. I want it to keep going, so that is why I would use a set interval. And now you'll see that every 2 seconds the song is going to keep updating, and it'll just continue to loop. All right. All right, so let's just keep going here. Basically, the rest of the slides are going to go through and continue to show some examples of using set interval versus set timeout, and it'll do things like slideshows. So at this point, though, I think I'm going to stop the lecture here. I've posted all of the slides, and also let's look at the lab really quickly. So if I go to the current lab. We've got lab 7, and the exercises for lab 7 are the book exercises 7.1 and 7.2, and then the extra exercise 7.1. So I have posted the extra exercises and book exercises zipped folders here. You have a PDF for the extra exercises, and the instructions for the book exercises are in the book. So I'd like you guys to go through, try doing the lab. And next time we have a lecture, I'll probably go through 1 or 2 of the exercises as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just stop here with the new content, and we'll go back to the whiteboard, and we'll just go through one more example for the project algorithm. So to wrap things up, I want to come back to our project for a minute and go through another example of the algorithm. And what I encourage you guys to do is go back, review this video, come up with your own formulas, and then go through the steps of adding them into the array. This is something that I practice when I'm solving problems. I'll represent my data structures, I'll write them out. So if it was an array I'm using, I'll write them out in this format, and then I'll basically show each step what I'm adding to the array. And this really helps visualize the problem and make sure that I'm clear that I understand what I'm doing. So we already did 5 times 6 plus 21. Let's do 200 minus 33 divided by 3. So for this one, the person hits 2. At this point, we're storing the value 2 in a variable because we don't know, are they just entering 2 or are they going to continue entering more numbers? Then they enter 0. We then concatenate that with 2, so now we're up to 20. Then they enter 0 again. Now we're at 200. And now they enter the minus operator. So in our original array, we would then place 200 in here, and we would place the minus operator, okay? We know now that the person is going to continue to enter in numbers now, because they've just completed an operator. So now the person hits 3, and we store that in a variable. They go ahead and they hit 3 again, and then they hit the division sign. So at this point, we know they're done entering in the number 33. we can go ahead and put in 33. We can also go and put in the division operator in our original elements array. And now we can let them continue entering numbers. They hit 3, and then they hit the equal sign. So we know they're done entering that number. We put 3 into our array. All right, let's do the same. So basically what we have here, this is a representation we can use to build up a string that shows the exact formula the person entered. Let's now go ahead and do the same thing with a formula elements array. And the key difference here is that as we enter elements, we're going to solve them for multiplication or division. So in this case, the person enters 2, 0, 0, then we get the minus. So we enter in 200, and we put in the minus. Now, as we do this, we look and we see, is the previous operation multiplication or division? Well, there is no previous operation, so we can ignore that and we can just continue moving on. Now they enter a 3 and a 3, and they hit a division symbol. So at this point, we know they entered the number 33. I place that into my array. We also know that the operation they want to do is division. Now, before I enter my division symbol, I'm going to check, from this position here, is the previous operator multiplication or division? In this case, it is not, so I can go ahead and enter in my division, and I now let the person continue entering values and numbers. So they enter 3, then they hit the equals operator, or the equal sign, to solve the formula. So at this point, I know that 3 is the value I want to store. Now, because they entered the equals operator, I know I'm actually done my entering information. So I look at the current position in the array, and I look at the previous operator that was added. In this case, it's a division operator. So that means I have to solve this and store the value in this array. So I'm going to take 33, and I am going to divide it by 3, and that gives me 11. So I'm going to then remove that operation, basically remove those elements from the array, and enter in 11 that represents that value. Now I have two arrays. The first one is used, the original array is used for displaying what the person entered, and the formula elements is used for solving, because it will only contain addition or subtraction. I can easily pass this to a function that'll take 200 and subtract 11, okay, and come up with a value of 189. Okay, so that wraps up the lecture for today. The material for Chapter 7 is there. I've got the video showing examples. I'd really like you guys to try getting in and doing a couple of the lab exercises, see how you do with that, and then we'll continue moving on, doing some examples next time I have a class with you guys. Okay, take care, have a good day.